Είμαστε έτοιμοι? Καλησπέρα σας. Είμαι η Μαρία Γεωργοπούλου, η Διευθύντρια της Γεναδίου Βιβλιοθήκης και είναι μεγάλη μου χαρά να σας καλωσορίσω στο Kotzen Hall, στο αμφιθέατρο της Αμερικανικής Σχολής για τη σημερινή μας εκδήλωση, η οποία, όπως ξέρετε όλοι που είστε εδώ, γίνεται με αφορμή την έκθεση που έχω συνεπιμεληθεί με την Ναταλία Βογκέικοφ, την Διευθύντρια των Αρχείων, και την Ελευθερία Δαλέζιου, αρχαιονόμο της Αμερικανικής Σχολής, και η οποία έχει να κάνει με την Αμερικανική ανακουφιστική βοήθεια προς την Ελλάδα από το 1918 μέχρι το 1929. Όσοι από εσάς δεν έχετε δει την έκθεση, ελπίζω ότι θα καταφέρετε να τη δείτε είτε σήμερα, που είναι ανοιχτή μέχρι τις 9, είτε κάποια άλλη μέρα, και έχουμε και ξεναγήσεις. Και πραγματικά είναι ένα υλικό πλούσιο, ενδιαφέρον, συγκινητικό, που πιστεύουμε ότι πραγματικά αξίζει τον κόπο κανείς να το δει. Για διάφορους λόγους, και πολύ περισσότερο γιατί υπάρχει πάντοτε ένας ανοιχτός διάβλος επικοινωνίας με την Αμερική και ιδιαίτερα με το Near East Relief Foundation, θα κάνουμε η συζήτησή μας σήμερα θα είναι στα αγγλικά, αλλά πιστεύω ότι σε περίπτωση που στο τέλος υπάρχουν ερωτήσεις και στα ελληνικά, θα προσπαθήσουμε να τις μεταφράσουμε και να τις απαντήσουμε σε όποια γλώσσα βολεύει. Οπότε θα μου επιτρέψετε να το γυρίσω τώρα στα αγγλικά. I'm delighted to invite you and to invite you to Kotzen Hall and to our lecture this evening, which, of course, those of you who are here and those of you who listen to us and are watching us online, it is a privilege to have with us a panel of 3 people who are going to talk to us about the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros. And I'm only saying a few words of introduction for our speakers, because, as you will see, they have a very interesting way in which they will talk to us about the project for the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros. This lecture is organized in tandem with the exhibition that we have on view at the Makrigiannis wing of the American School of Classical Studies, American Relief Aid to Greece from 1918 to 1929, and with the title In the Name of Humanity. The exhibition has been co-curated by Natalia Vogeikov Brogan, who is the director of the archives of the American School, and Lefteria Daleziou, who is the archivist of the archives, and myself. So tonight, our program is a presentation of the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros, and we have 3 distinguished and very unique people who are going to give us their perspectives on this wonderful and very important institution that was founded to cope with one of the major issues and problems of displaced people and refugees, which has to do with young kids who are orphaned and have lost their parents. So I will start with my colleague, Eleftheria Daleziou, who is a historian and an archivist, and she studied in her degrees in history, her BA, her MPhil and PhD are from the University of Glasgow in the UK. And she also has an MLit in Archives and Records Management from the University of Dundee in the UK. And she's an expert on the Greek history of the 20th century, especially the interwar period. And she has published extensively on this field and the field of philanthropy. And in addition to co-curating this exhibition in the name of humanity, she also curated an online exhibition on Schliemann last year. Lefteris Zorzos, who is flanked by these two ladies here on stage, is a Bronze Age archaeologist trained at University College London. And his research focuses on the prehistoric landscape of Santorini, of the island of Thera, through phytolith analysis. I sense from his background and the things that he has done that he's a great researcher who also seeks to figure out the context around archaeology along with the historical and cultural heritage of Thera, of the island of Thera. And since 2014, he has worked on the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros, the Neros project, and we're going to hear more about this tonight. And he recently curated the exhibition entitled 1923-2023, the Syros Near East Relief Orphanage, and there is a book available for you to browse and to buy if you want. Nina Georgiadou is an architect and civil engineer, and she specializes on the protection, restoration, and management of architectural heritage. She has studied at the National Technical University of Athens and at the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation at Leuven University in Belgium. She had an internship in 2021 at the Museum of Prehistoric Thera, and she has written her diploma thesis on the regeneration of the bombed squares in the medieval town of Rhodes, and she's intimately connected with the project about the Near East orphanage in Syros. So without any further ado, I invite our three speakers to take the podium or to take their seats at the table and speak to us about this institution, the Near East Orphanage of Syros.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening and welcome. Our discussion tonight centers around an orphanage. It is widely and globally recognized that children should grow up in a safe and protected family environment and not in institutions and structures that have a negative impact on their physical and mental health alike. However, this is not a perfect world. It never was, and for children especially, the greatest victims of warfare and displacement in history. UNICEF estimates that approximately 150 million children worldwide are orphans, and many of these are due to deaths caused by war. The numbers today are shocking, and I quote, "Around the world, attacks on children continue unabated. The number of countries experiencing violent conflict is the highest it has been in the last 30 years. The result is that more than 30 million children have been displaced by conflict. Many of them are being enslaved, trafficked, abused, and exploited. Many more are living in limbo without official immigration status or access to education and health care. From Afghanistan to Mali to South Sudan, Yemen, and beyond, warring parties are flouting one of the most basic rules of war, that is the protection of children. And we should add in this long list Ukraine, Afghanistan, Gaza, and the West Bank. Children in war zones are caught in the middle of armed conflicts, become orphaned, are at risk of dying from starvation, dehydration, disease. A cornerstone of the international relief effort during and after the First World War involved children, feeding them, providing shelter, maintaining their health, educating and training them. This was done first in Europe and then in the Near East, where the war continued for at least 5 more years. International relief organizations continued and expanded their operations after 1918 in the territories of the former Ottoman Empire. The United States was very much involved in this humanitarian operation, given its economic capacity and, for many, following also a moral obligation to help. American organizations play a central role in post-First World War humanitarian relief. Not only were they pioneering at the time, they often continue to operate today. The war resulted in millions of displaced people and orphans, so despite flaws, the actions of international and American relief organizations in particular represent a commitment to humanity. To document and study this effort, we largely draw information from highly accessible archival collections. I can mention the Rockefeller Archives, the Hoover Institution Archives in the United States, or the Save the Children Fund Archives in the United Kingdom. All contain primarily success stories and success stories that humanitarian agencies and actors documented and preserved. This is why we should supplement this material for the history of humanitarian work in different places, like state, municipal archives, and of course private papers and testimonies. Nothing should be taken at face value, as both expressions of gratitude and notions of disappointment or even resentment sometimes form part of the story. Of course, there are blind spots and lives which were not saved, but at the same time, there are many stories of success and a plethora of lives saved. Humanitarian legacies are worth remembering, even if we must look at them with a critical eye. Our panel discussion presentation tonight concerns one American relief organization, the Near East Relief, and its work in Greece between 1922 and 1929. We will focus on its orphanage work, discussing the construction and operation of orphanage facilities. The Near East Relief is one of the American philanthropic organizations whose work is highlighted in our current exhibition, as Dr. Georgiadou said earlier, In the Name of Humanity at the Makrigiannis Wing. My short contribution to tonight's panel is to introduce very briefly the organization, and after setting up the wider picture, Lefteris, Zorzos, and Nina Georgiadou will share with us the rediscovery of one of the most exciting projects undertaken by the Near East Relief in Greece between 1923 and 1929, the construction and operation of the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros, a complex of buildings, the largest orphanage ever constructed in the region of the Eastern Mediterranean, and its rediscovery during the past 10 years as a historical site. It is an exciting work in progress. Lefteris and Nina will share with us the efforts of the Near East Relief Syros project to bring to light not only the orphanage and its buildings, but also stories of its residents, children and personnel alike. For the last 10 years, the project runs both an archaeological survey and an architectural reconstruction of the complex of buildings, and recently has embarked on the discovery of previously unknown sources, archival collections in the United States, in Greece, and elsewhere, on and about the orphanage. Last September, in close cooperation with the Near East Relief Historical Society in the States and other institutions and individuals, the project commemorated the centenary of the building of the orphanage with an exhibition held on the island of Syros, offering some snapshots of life on its premises during the years 1923-1929. The Near East Relief traces its beginnings in 1915, responding to the outbreak of a humanitarian crisis caused by the deportations and expulsions of minority populations in the Ottoman Empire, Armenians, Assyrians, Greeks, among others. But between 1915 and 1929, the Near East Relief operated in the Ottoman Empire, in Armenia, in Persia, in Syria, in Palestine, areas in the Caucasus, Lebanon, Greece, and Egypt. The organization fed more than 1 million people who were on the verge of starvation and more than 12 million others. It built hospitals, it maintained existing ones, and housed, taught, and cared for approximately 132,000 orphans in the Near East. It was a privately funded relief organization, what we would call today an NGO, a non-governmental organization, and all its revenue and the financing of its operations stemmed from private funding, money coming from campaigns and private donations. The Near East Relief conducted massive fundraising appeals in the United States. The efforts targeted not only people of means, but primarily the average citizen, aiming from its very beginning to expand at the base of support, to achieve actually a broader base of support. And it worked. I mean, between 1950 and 1930, the amount of money they raised was more than $117 million. Americans became supporters of the Near East relief everywhere, in all states, in churches, in public places, in community groups, in colleges, you name it, the organization's people were there. And it was not only money they collected, the drives were held for the collection of foodstuff and clothing, as well as for child sponsorship. If you visit our exhibition next door, you will have the opportunity to see several items related to the Near East relief campaigns for the collection not only of money, but also of food and clothing, ranging from tags, as this one here, posters, handbooks, and bulletins, and even pre-printed checks for bank donations. They used many diverse means to generate support and communicate the message to the American people. All were modern and more effective than ever before. Last March, in a conference held in this hall on the work of the international relief organizations in Greece after the end of the First World War, under the auspices of the Foundation of the Greek Parliament and the American School of Classical Studies Archives, Professor Jack Davis highlighted the depth and breadth of one single campaign in 1919 to raise $30 million in a matter of a few months. The representation of children was the most effective tool to engage and mobilize the public and, in effect, to generate contributions. The picture of the distressed child, often suffering from malnutrition, diseases, orphaned, spoke directly to people's hearts, making it easier to put their hands in their pockets. This is hardly the context to talk about the effectiveness of the fundraising campaigns, but we need to stress that from 1923 onwards, the situation slightly changed. Donations dropped, despite the rigorous campaigns, and this had an impact on the planning and operations of the organization. In Constantinople, the Caucasus, the other cities of the former Ottoman Empire, up to 1922, taking care of the orphans was a top priority in the organization's agenda. For example, as early as 1920, the Near East Relief maintained 229 orphanages, and the total of children under its care was around 54,600 children. In 1923, the Near East Relief maintained 125 orphanages with 64,000 children, while partial assistance was given to 50,000 children outside institutions with families in refugee camps. The organization had no direct presence in Greece prior to the September 1922 catastrophe. The Near East Relief, however, had responded to the emergency relief situation in Smyrna. Personnel and supplies had reached the Anatolian Greeks in the city, and the American State Department had authorized the organization, along with the American Red Cross, to undertake the provision of emergency relief assistance to Greece for the refugees, with the medical support of a third organization, the American Women's Hospitals. The news of the victory of the Turkish nationalists under Mustafa Kemal had triggered a series of developments in Constantinople. The new Turkish regime did not guarantee the safety of their operations, so the Near East relief officials responded immediately, taking into consideration the safety of the thousands of orphans under their care. They took the decision to move them to safer spots. That was Greece, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. On December 6, 1922, 3 months after the fateful burning of Smyrna, and as one of the gravest, most perplexing, and most shameful international situations, in the words of a contemporary observer, was unfolding, the Greek statesman and former Prime Minister Eleftheris was presented with a single-page report with the numbers of orphans and unattended children that had already arrived in Greece under the care of one single American relief organization, the Near East Relief. Many more children would follow. Many would be evacuated to Syria, Palestine. More children had to, some groups of children had to be moved several times, traveling by boat or on foot, or donkeys, those destined to reach Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. The Near East Relief personnel evacuated more than 15,000 orphans, to various spots in Greece. 2/3 of the children were of Armenian origin, the rest were Greek. Some sources mention 17,000 people, others raise the number to 18,500, and the latter number seems to be closer to truth, as the organization also took care of unattended Ottoman Greek children during the chaotic situation following the Smyrna catastrophe. But these children were soon reunited with their lost parents or family members. In November and December 1922, groups of orphans arrived in Athens, Loutraki, Corinth, Piraeus, Oropos, Corfu, Salonika, Alexandroupoli, Mount Athos, and Kavala. Children were finally distributed to Athens, Loutraki, Corinth, Oropos, and Corfu. The first order of business was, of course, accommodation. All summer, hotels at the seaside resorts of Loutraki and Edipsos were requisitioned and turned into orphanages, plus the former palace of the Austrian Kaiser on the island of Corfu, the old palace in the center of Athens, the Zapion Exhibition Center, and military barracks in Corinth. The Near East Relief sought more permanent solutions rather than hosting children in hotels and temporary facilities. This was settled once the Greek government gave a large piece of land on the island of Syros. And I will now give, the floor to Lefteris and Nina for a hands-on presentation of the Near East Relief Syros Orphanage Project and the exciting rediscovery of a historical site which has stood on the island of Syros for 100 years.
Thank you very much, Eleftheria. Good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure and honor to be here tonight, and we would like to thank you all for being here. We would like to thank the Georgiadou Library and Maria Georgopoulou for the invitation. Firstly, I would like to congratulate the curators on an exceptional exhibition that everyone can and should visit in the Makrigiannis wing. The exhibition, co-curated by Eleftheria, Daleziou, Maria Georgopoulou, and Natalia Vogeikov-Brogan, is really the very first systematic exhibition and a lot of research taking place on the Near East Relief and other humanitarian organizations would not be possible a few years ago and opens the doors for further research. So I believe it is very, very important to state that and to highlight that. As Eleftheria mentioned, we will be speaking about the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros, which was one of the most important institutions created in Greece. The Near East Relief Orphanage was built in Hermopolis on the island of Syros to accommodate the large number of orphaned refugee children that the NER had gathered in Greece after the Asia Minor catastrophe in response to the problem of housing and the lack of infrastructure of charitable institutions. The specific location in Hermopolis was chosen for the good prospects of agricultural cultivation and the easy access to building materials, but primarily for the abundance of neighboring industries, which could contribute to the professional absorption of the children after reaching adulthood. As R.M. Davidson writes in his report in the Near East magazine in May 1923, and I quote, "I am told that the city and surrounding territory offer 21 different trades to which the orphan boys and girls can be apprenticed, and possibly the largely influenced the Near East Relief to erect the permanent buildings on the island." End quote. For this reason, the Greek government granted the NER the large area at the location of Axos, or Avgo as it is known, at the outskirts of the industrial zone of Hermopolis after forced land expropriation. The construction of the Syros orphanage was done gradually, a combination of labor from the children themselves as well as other refugees under the supervision of some specialized craftsmen. Construction began in February 1923, initially with 800 teenage or adult refugees who had received construction training and were recruited by the NER for this purpose. At first, the workers lived in tents in the open spaces. Afterwards, the future inhabitants of the orphanage, the orphaned children, and especially the boys, who were guided by specialized Greek craftsmen, also participated in the construction. The American Orphanage of Syros was Near East Relief's most important project in the Eastern Mediterranean. At the same time, it was the only new building created by this philanthropic organization in the Greek area and gained a nationwide reputation as a technical school due to the vocational training program it implemented. In the few years of its operation between 1923 and 1929, it accommodated approximately 7,000 orphan refugee children. In the first year, 2,500 children, then approximately 3,000 children, and in the last years of operation, 2,000 children. As the rest of the NER orphanages in Greece were closing, the children gathered at the orphanage of Syros, which also provided them with the opportunity for education and professional training. As the NER mission was coming to its end around 1928-9, and before the Syros orphanage even closed, there was a public debate about the future use of its facilities. Various alternative functions were then proposed, such as the establishment of an agricultural school, a school for the blind and deaf, or a reformatory. Between 1932 and 1934, a reformatory school was housed in the north buildings. Then after 1934, it became a military base. On the slide, you can see the main phases and the chronological periods. In the winter of 2014, an unexpected discovery was made at the infantry military base of Hermopolis. Walking through the old buildings of the barracks that housed thousands of soldiers and before them orphan children, a bullet was discovered on the floor in an empty room in the north building. Looking upwards, we realized that the wooden floors of the upper level had cracked and objects, primarily documents, were falling through the lower level. Further investigation indicated that underneath the wooden floorboards of the military base, 25 centimeters of objects, letters, documents, photographs, toys, weapons, clothing, food, utensils, tools, and many more items were preserved in situ. The majority of the material had been discarded either by direct disposing of a single object through a crack or through creating a temporary opening and placing larger amounts of material. This appears to have been in the majority of areas excavated, implemented as a form of easy disposal without having to leave the property. In more rare cases, the material was placed intentionally and carefully. In one example, they had created a small shelf where they had placed pebbles and sand, and then some of their prized possessions, like some of their toys that they had, the porcelain toys, and then in a smaller bag. Every single context was completely different from the other, which was associated both in regards to the location, north and south buildings, as well as the material that was intermixed from the various phases. In some cases, a form of palimpsest-like layering occurred, but in the majority of the cases, the material found inside each wooden box was comprised of material from different periods. The discovery of these objects led to the current research project, where it developed from a rescue-type excavation of several of the different locations of the wooden floors to a systematic study through archival records. The original project began with Dimitris Boudalis, who was the commander of the base and supported the project, and this resulted in the creation of a historical exhibition in the entrance of the military base with the involvement of several officers and soldiers assisting. The reconstruction of the building to house the historical exhibition was done through volunteer work. The study of the material from all the different phases of habitation is challenging due to the fragmentary nature of the finds. Even though the finds are of interest diachronically, our project primarily has focused on the period regarding the NER orphanage. The material discovered within the floorboards offers a unique insight into the lives of the children that lived in the orphanage. Material that would otherwise be lost provides relevant information some 100 years later and offers a glance into the life of some of the children and the staff. What was particularly intriguing a few years ago on the island of Syros is that many of the islanders were not aware of the existence of the orphanage. Almost all knew of the existence of the army base, but this has almost completely wiped off from recent memory the important role of the NER orphanage, or as it was mainly known on the island, the American orphanage. Very few photographs and postcards depicting the institution had been discovered at the time, and luckily through the collaboration with members of the Armenian National Committee of Greece, access to the photographic archive of Charlie Hanikian had been made available after part of it was donated by his granddaughter Nana Spiropoulou to the Armenian Genocide Museum. This formed the basis of the current project, as it presented us how much material was actually still available to be studied and how little was known about the Syros orphanage at the time. The research project focused on the digitization of archival material as well as the conservation of the material identified within the floorboards. This was done in collaboration with two exceptional conservators, Kostas Zachariou and Thalia Daluka, who are here with us today. Although at first the project had very limited access to archival material, we were very fortunate to have been able to collaborate with important institutions in the United States, in Greece, and Armenia. Of particular importance has been the collaboration with the Near East Foundation and the Near East Relief Historical Society. From an early stage, they supported our project and gave us access to the incredible archives, primarily located at the Rockefeller Archive Center. We are indebted to them for receiving access to the digitized archival records. One of the most important archives redigitized especially for the current research project are the Fred and Carrie Midgley papers. This formed a cornerstone in our study of the Syros NER orphanage. We're particularly grateful for being able to access this vast collection of letters, photographs, personal items preserved by the descendants of Fred and Carrie Midgley and organized by their granddaughter Nancy Winter Taylor, who donated it to the Near East Relief Historical Society. Over 200 letters were written in the period between 1926 and 1928 and form a multifaceted record of their period spent in Greece and on their travels. Their descriptions throughout the 2-year stay in Syros are incredible, both in the level of detail provided about the island of Syros, the staff members of the orphanage, the children, and the day-to-day activities taking place. The archive is significantly large, and although our research project studied several aspects of records for a long period of time, there's a noteworthy amount of information that needs to be analyzed in the future regarding both Syros, the Near East Relief, but also with the information provided by the relatives. On that note, I would, and with the importance of the archival records, I would like to give the floor to Nina Georgiadou, who has formed an integral part of the NEROS project and was instrumental in the study and deciphering of the orphanage, and she will be speaking to you about this and a lot more.
Good evening. Thank you, Lefteris and Eleftheria, for giving me the chance to share some special elements for the Syros Near East Relief Orphanage from the perspective of an architect. So the following slides concern the special configuration of the orphanage, and they also summarize the historical research, but also the article we wrote with Lefteris. Of course, you can find more details about it in our publication with title The Syros Near East Relief Orphanage, History, Construction, Operation, Architecture, and Enhancement. So the huge area in Hermopolis, the time of the operation of the American school, can be presented thanks to the reconstruction or recreation of the site plan of that time. The process of recreating the building program and the land uses was a difficult one, since we didn't have any original drawings or documentation. However, by using several historical pictures and other evidence, but also considering the current condition of the buildings and the old traces they show, we were able to present this specific result. As we can see on this slide, the orphanage was structured by many indoor and outdoor spaces, primary and secondary buildings, as well as other infrastructure. The two main building complexes were the girls' and the boys' wing, housing the daycare areas of the orphans. It is also important to highlight that the area experienced different building phases. For instance, the phase of the construction or the phase of the agricultural project, wherein a part of the area was used for cultivation purposes. So the girls' wing was the big building complex in the northwestern part of the total area. It accommodated the everyday life activities of the girls and their education, emphasizing on home economics. It will be interesting here to present some points regarding the building program of that ward. The education and the activities of the girls were taking place on the ground floors of the buildings. On the other hand, the dormitories of the girls were situated on the floors of the complex. In addition, the girls' wing used to accommodate the bakery, the kitchen, and the dining room for all the orphans. Finally, in the junction of the buildings and above the corner external staircase, some administrative spaces were built. On the other hand, the boys' wing was a linear building complex in the southern part of the total area, close to Avgo Hill. In the same way as the girls' wing, the activities of the boys were housed on the lower floors, while the dormitories on the upper floors. The boys' educational program was concentrated on technical professions. Their schedule included many tasks, such as the carpentry, the mechanical training, the electrical engineering, furniture making, and others. Except of the two monolithic main buildings that we described before, the site plan included a group of scattered secondary buildings. The former were mostly dedicated to the American personnel of the orphanage. For example, there was the White residence for the family of the director, George White. There was also the Midley's residence for Fred and Carrie Midley, who were in charge for the agricultural project. There is also evidence about the personnel house, or the pink house, for the rest of the international staff, and information about a hospital of the orphanage on the top of the hill. From the facilities and the image of the past, one cannot exclude the outdoor spaces and a network of auxiliary units as a vital part of the everyday life of the orphans. Between 1926 and 1928, the agricultural project was applied under the supervision of Fred Midley. This project was created for educational reasons, and the orphans were trained on how to cultivate the land and take care of the domesticated animals. Moreover, between the outdoor spaces, someone could find a football field, gardens, a playground, warehouses and wells, and a village of mud houses built by the orphans themselves. As we can see on the next slide, that shows a picture from the New Near East magazine, a large plot of land was used for outdoor events and ceremonies in the first phase of the operation of the orphanage. It is mentioned as a chapel in the open air at Syros. Last but not least, the orphanage had advanced infrastructure regarding the water, the electricity, and the drainage system. Indicatively, it is worth mentioning that the open spaces accommodated 7 cisterns or water deposits and 14 traditional wooden wells. Consequently, the previous special characteristics synthesized the image of the orphanage in the 1920s. After the end of the operation in 1930 and the multiple reuses of the buildings for the military schools, this image gradually started to change. The current state of conservation of the Syros Near East relief buildings after 100 years is a big topic for discussion. For this reason, the team examined the deterioration of the girls' wing, which remains without use and it is more accessible than the boys' wing. Therefore, on this slide, you can see the current condition of the buildings, which are characterized by abandonment and lack of conservation. The following drawings present the current state of conservation of a part of the girls' wing. Some spaces in the interior had been modified to host military uses, mainly on the ground floor. Some of the most important damage caused is the loss of part of the roof and the bad state of conservation of the wooden floors. However, thanks to this, the process of excavation was implemented, as Lefteris described before. In our publication, we try to explain the importance of the preservation of the old orphanage as a valuable example of architectural heritage. The specific architectural case presents aesthetic, historic, social, and scientific values. But what are the factors that affect the exploitation of that building units? And how will the spaces of the old orphanage can be reused in the future? Originally, the total area was the property of the National Defense Fund. After a noteworthy effort, the municipality of Syros claimed and finally gained a part of the ownership, aiming to establish there a university campus. Currently, this part is in a transition period. We hope that our investigation will help in the decision-making and the restoration of the original image of the past, with respecting to the integrity and authenticity of the buildings and the open spaces. We also hope for an accommodation of an exhibition or a museum inside with the new evidence that came to light. Thank you very much, and now we'll give back the floor to Lefteris to continue.
Thank you very much, Nina. We would now like to present a short video of the project in order to give a better understanding of what our project overall, the exhibition, were about. We believe that the short video created by Nikos Korakakis will bring Syros to life from the initial stages of the current project, the exhibition and the publication. So if Konstantinos could please play the video. Thank you. Thank you very much. We hope that the video was of interest and you had the chance to see what Nikos Korakakis had created, who's also responsible for the design, both of the publication but also of the exhibition. We let the video play until the end because we wanted to show you one of the highlights at the end of the exhibition. And you saw Kostas Zachariou with his son Manolis, who were over one of the wooden boxes that had been created where people could place their impressions. And there were hundreds that were shared during the time of the exhibition. I just wanted to share one that Dimitris Georgiadou actually wrote when he saw on the opening night one of the children saying that they were looking for the orphan children. So one of the children visiting the exhibition was actually looking for the orphan children so that they could play with them. And we thought that this was a very moving image. As we come closer to the end of the presentation segment of the evening, I would like to highlight some of the elements of our research project that we are continuing. Some of them can be considered as somewhat unorthodox. The discovery of the artifacts underneath the wooden floorboards of the orphanage offered the opportunity for the discovery of hundreds of original objects trapped in what can be described as a small time capsules that eventually would be discovered. Analysis of the material has taken place using some more scientific methods, but due to the nature of the publication and exhibition, we selected to present more of an anthropocentric approach to the history of the orphanage. One of the discussions that became prevalent in our search for the personnel, but also individual orphan children, was associated with the lack of knowledge we have regarding the names, origin, and diaspora of many of the children. One of the most intriguing discoveries made were some list fragments which stated specific names of children, many of which we had no prior knowledge of. These lists were perhaps either used to record the children that were staying at the orphanage, that had arrived, or were possibly ready to move on. At the same time, finding several personal items such as the clothes tags with the individual unit and code of each child highlighted how important each individual child was. This was the approach at the orphanage, and what makes this abundantly clear are the individual tags that help to keep track of each child's clothes and both held him or her accountable. For the upkeep of the clothes, but also gave them a sense of ownership and individuality. It is extremely difficult to have a sense of individuality at such institutions. The various vocational training courses that the children took helped them create a sense of independence for themselves. This was further highlighted with the absence of large walls and having a sense of being trapped. At the same time, many of the children were permitted to build their own mud huts and essentially made it their own space. This was also evident with the agricultural program by Fred Midgley with the individualized gardens, as mentioned by Nina earlier. The aspect of individuality troubled us throughout the research project, and our search for individuals and their names became particular in the personnel. Of the approximately 7,000 children that passed through the orphanage at Hermopolis, we have the names of less than 500 children. As with all victims of genocide, the approach should be a way to honor those who have passed through the orphanage and survived. The continued quest to discover more names and individuals will continue over the next years. Moving forward from the current research project, it is believed that more research is necessary in the nearest relief orphanages in Greece and elsewhere. The lack of knowledge that we have on such important living monuments such as Syros orphanage is impressive. As mentioned, some 7,000 children passed through the orphanage of Syros, and every single one of them had an important story to tell regarding the initial survival, the temporary housing provided, their travels to the island of Syros, and then the life at the orphanage for a certain period of time. But what do we really know about what these children did after their time on the island of Syros? The answer is somewhat complex, as we only have evidence for some of the children. Not all the children were perhaps were orphans from both parents, and there is evidence of families being reunited throughout Greece, but also in various locations around the world. In the Midley letters, different cases of children reunited with family members are mentioned, including locations such as France, Bulgaria, the UK, the US, Switzerland, Argentina, Palestine, and Egypt. What is also evident from the Midley letters is that several centers, networks, and affiliations had been created in order for the children or young adults to be able to find work once they had completed their training and studies in Syros. The specific network in Greece was centered particularly in Macedonia. References are made for individuals or groups leaving for Kavala, Drama, and Thessaloniki. The two images you can see on the right are the stamps found in the Midley archives, and below on the left is an image from the Ruth Meles archive, which is a very important archive discovered a few days before we went to press, which is a very important archive that still needs to be studied. And then finally, I would like to mention two specific examples that came to light during the exhibition and were both particularly moving. George Pazalos is here with us today. He contacted us about his grandfather, Platonas Diktiopoulos, on the final day of the exhibition in Syros, and mentioned that his grandfather was at the orphanage and he would carry this photo of his fellow unit members in his pocket from 1927 until the day he died in 1995, the picture you can see on the left. This was the only family he had. We cannot stress how important one photograph can be. This specific photograph, as you can see, mentions the names of the boys in the unit, along with their unique code number, which we saw in tags in the previous slide. Finally, and in order to emphasize the importance of individual and family archives, and hoping that this will create further investigation and more family boxes to be opened and investigated, we have the very special collection of Efronia Syrinidou Kabouropoulou, who worked at the orphanage of Syros. Her great-granddaughter Laura discovered a box of photographs from when Efronia lived in Smyrna and when she later lived in Syros and Athens. Laura's family were actually one of the very few sponsors we had as part of the project, but the discovery was made after this, and it forms one of the most promising examples as it contains information about life in Smyrna and other areas in Asia Minor, the NER in Syros, Athens, the American Women's Hospital, and much more. I will now pass back the floor to Eleftheria on the notes of educators and education, with one more striking image discovered in the Near East Foundation archives.
Children in the Near East relief orphanages were first provided with a comprehensive elementary education and then began learning trades. Education was provided in their language, in the case of Greece in Greek and in Armenian for the children of the Syros orphanage. The Greek state's curriculum included a 6-year compulsory elementary education, followed by a 2-year Greek school, and then children who were to attend high school attended the local high school in Hermopolis. The Armenian children were also taught the Greek language, and I would like to stress here that language was and still is the passport for refugee children's integration. However, most of the children were taught trades. I mean, Nina showed us the workshops, where the workshops were, and how important was the notion of vocational school for the Near East Relief Orphanage. The goal was clear. I mean, it was to make them self-supportive. This does not mean that they were excluded or prohibited from attending higher education. And we do have reports and we do have references to children, bright children, who were sent further for higher studies. Vocational training, however, was a priority because these children had to survive in a war-stricken, bankrupt country and largely an agricultural country. All Near East Relief orphans included, those with special needs included, when there was no provision by the Greek state, especially in the first years after the Asia Minor catastrophe, all Near East Relief orphans were receiving education. This was not the case for many refugee children still living in camps and temporary accommodations with their families. I mean, education for refugee children residing in camps and temporary accommodation was difficult, primarily due to the harsh living conditions, and not a priority neither for the families nor the state. According to 1925 data, out of 47,216 children under 16 in Athens refugee camps, only 9,938 were receiving any kind of schooling. Around 38 to 39,000 were either out in the streets doing nothing or trying to help their family's income, doing, I suppose, all sorts of work, which was scarce even for adults. No schooling or any form of vocational training was received whatsoever. Initiatives taken by the Nearest Relief for the Orphans under its care, that is education, integration in the local societies, and employment opportunities, are initiatives which are considered today necessary for refugee, unattended, or orphan children in host countries. Education keeps hope alive, as school is inspiration for a better future, language is the passport for refugee children's integration, and creating employment opportunities for young people is key for their future.
And before we move to the questions, I believe I wanted to emphasize this character as well of the different languages, which I failed to mention, and has to do with with how this was very much a school that had many different languages, so that the teachers and the students spoke 4 or 5 different languages in Greek, English, Turkish, Armenian, and Assyrian as well. So this is a very, very important aspect to consider. I believe we have completed the presentation section of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for a very lively and extremely interesting and moving and touching presentation. To me, it's unbelievable how much of this is forgotten. Somehow, it's, a huge operation. Buildings that you cannot neglect. You see them, and yet it was gone from memory. So it's, I'm sure there are many, many questions. And I'm here to help help with questions from online. But we start from questions in the room.
If you would allow us, before we begin with the questions, we would like to ask Dimitra Hadzidimitriou to make a comment. She's actually been doing research on the day after what we were just talking about as well, and she contacted us after the exhibition, and she has been doing some very interesting research in drama and Kavala, and this is very, very important. As a few months ago, we barely knew what happened in that next day. So if she would like to make a comment, and then we can perhaps continue with the questions. Thank you.
Είναι εντάξει. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Το ενδιαφέρον το δικό μου, πέρα από την έρευνα του κυρίου Ζόρζου, είχε να κάνει με το αν είχε διαπιστωθεί στη διάρκεια της δικής του έρευνας από πού προερχόταν αυτά τα παιδάκια και ο τρόπος με τον οποίο κατέφθαναν στη Σύρο. Η δική μου έρευνα, η οποία είναι έρευνα των τελευταίων ετών, έχει να κάνει με έναν σπουδαίο πολιτικό, ξεχασμένο κι αυτόν, ο Λάμπρος Λαμπριανίδης, ο οποίος στην αρχή της πολιτικής του διαδρομής, το 1923, πολύγλωσσος, καλλιεργημένος, σπουδαίος διπλωμάτης, πόντιος από την Τραπεζούντα, Σαντέος για την ακρίβεια, τοποθετήθηκε, διορίστηκε στη Μεικτή Επιτροπή Ανταλλαγής και υπηρέτησε ως επικεφαλής της Μεικτής της 7ης Υποεπιτροπής στη Σαψούντα. Υπάρχουν πολλά δημοσιεύματα από τον ίδιο, κοινοποιήσεις στην ουσία, δημοσιεύματα τα οποία έχουμε εντοπίσει ακόμη και σε δραμηνές εφημερίδες της εποχής, το 24, γιατί τότε κυρίως αρχίζει η προώθηση όλων των εγκλωβισμένων και ενηλίκων μεταξύ αυτών, αλλά κατά κύριο λόγο παιδιών. Δεν είναι μόνο ότι τα παιδιά αυτά προωθούνται και σε συνεργασία πιο μπροστά στο ίδιο ορφανοτροφείο της Αμισού, όπου το 22 κλείνει, αλλά στην ουσία εκ των ενόντων διατηρείται και πάλι. Έχει σημασία ότι ενδιαφέρεται να εντοπίσει τουλάχιστον στις περιοχές όπου ο ίδιος έχει πρόσβαση και συγγενών, στη Δράμα, στην Καβάλα, στην περιοχή Ποντίων κυρίως, δίνοντας καταστάσεις ονομάτων και περιγράφοντας ακόμη και περιπτώσεις παιδιών τα οποία περίπου μπορούν να υπολογίσουν την ηλικία τους, αλλά δεν γνωρίζουν καν ούτε από πού προέρχονται, ούτε ποιοι είναι οι γονείς τους, ούτε και το δικό τους όνομα. Αυτό με οδήγησε στο Ιστορικό και Διπλωματικό Αρχείο και εκεί βρέθηκα μπροστά σε μια τεράστια έκπληξη με 26 φακέλους, όπου έχουμε πολύτιμο υλικό και αυτής της συνεργασίας και βέβαια απεγνωσμένων, αν θέλετε, εκκλήσεων από τον Λαμπριανίδη και τους συνεργάτες του για βοήθεια, για παιδιά τα οποία είναι θεόγυμνα, όπως τα περιγράφει. Πέρα από το ότι προωθούνται, πρέπει να αναζητηθούν, αν είναι δυνατόν, και οικογένειες συγγενικές, για να μπορέσουν να περιθάλψουν τα παιδιά. Θερμά συγχαρητήρια. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ που με καλέσατε απόψε.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Just a small recap in English, I believe, would be helpful. Ms. Hadzidimitriou has been studying the records of a very important politician by the name of Labrianidis. There are 26 folders in the historical and diplomatic archives, and there was quite a bit of information there, but the main part has to do with the important archive that includes lists of names. It includes records of children and where they were moved to, finding family members and placing them together. It is important to say, comment now, and this is a comment from me, that regarding what we've presented, but also the difficulties that existed at the time with the orphanages, and we can see the difficulties that exist with the children going to these different centers. Ms. Margari, who's here with us today, she told us of a letter that showed how children arriving in Drama, in some cases, were almost auctioned off to the highest bidder. And the very, very difficult conditions that existed at the time is something that definitely we need to look into. And by no means do we want to say that everything was rosy or peachy or in any sense overall, as that might be an impression. But the Syros orphanage was a unique orphanage, and so the children leaving from the orphanage were usually very sad about this. A lot of them missed their time being there, and this is shown by the interaction that takes place afterwards. But of course, when they left the orphanage, they were very optimistic about the next stage, the next step in their life, and this is a part of the project that we are looking to continue as we create a documentary about the Near East relief. And also continue the study on the island of Syros as well. Thank you.
Εκεί μπροστά.
Ευχαριστώ.
Σας ακούμε.
Αφού σας συγχαρώ για τις πολύτιμες πληροφορίες που μας δώσατε, θέλω να σας ρωτήσω αν στην έρευνά σας γνωρίζετε κάτι και για το ορφανοτροφείο που υπήρχε της Near East Relief στη Κεφαλονιά. Γιατί διάβασα και στο βιβλίο σας ότι η Ντόροθι Σάτον είχε περάσει 1 χρόνο εκεί πέρα και μετά ήρθε στη Σύρο. Λοιπόν, γιατί σας το ρωτάω, γιατί της θείας μου, αδερφής της μητέρας μου, η Πεθερά, ήρθε μικρό κοριτσάκι από την Ινόη του Πόντου και την πήγανε στην Κεφαλονιά. Και μάλιστα είχε πολύ άσχημες αναμνήσεις. Είχε περάσει πάρα πολύ άσχημα εκεί πέρα.
Yeah.
Just to give a little bit of translation on the question, Mrs. Margery mentioned the orphanage, the nearest relief orphanage on the island of Kefalonia. Indeed, there was an orphanage there for a very short period of time, and the director was Dorothy Sutton, whose archives are at the American School of Classical Studies archives. The orphanage there was called the Doll's House because the children there were toddlers, were either toddlers up to 4 to 5 years old. It was a short-lived project because all the children there were transferred eventually to Syros. She has some letters, Sutton, some letters written from her days on the island of Kefalonia. It was housed in the former barracks of the British army there. However, she says that almost all the children were, or the vast majority of them, were of Armenian origin. She had her colleagues there were almost all Armenian. And she had fond memories of her time there.
And yet, I mean, your relative didn't have good memories. So it's important to try and find as much information and to weigh in. If I may, there are some questions here that I wanted to relate. So we have very complimentary comments from Jane Hickman, Glenview, and Jane is asking, and this I guess is a question for the archaeologist, could some of the things found under the floorboards, especially paper, have been brought there by rodents?
Yes.
Pondikia.
Yes, absolutely. The way the floorboards were constructed and what Nina was showing in the drawings as well is that you do have that pass and gaps where they could have passed. There's some research that has been done in other areas of the world, and I think that's where the question comes from, that the rodents were actually transporting material and placing them in different areas. The difference being that the way the boxes are located wouldn't allow for the movement of the material, but definitely the material would have been intermixed with it. And I know you saw me in the video without gloves in many of the images, but yes, but not brought from elsewhere completely.
Another question, now that I have the floor, I will try and read through these questions. Glenview says, wonderful research project, and he looks forward to hearing more stories about, from histories from the children and grandchildren of the orphans. And then Panagiotis Papoulidis, after complimenting you, he's asking if it was common practice for the orphans to be instructed in their primary languages and as well as English, And a second question that he has is that his grandfather was a refugee sent to the orphanage of Loutraki, and he's asking where one could go to find information, archival information about that.
So regarding the first question, I think Eleftheria can answer this better, but they were instructed in their native language, and that's why it's important to see that over 100 different international, actually Greeks of Asia Minor descent or Armenian teachers existed at the orphanage, and only about 10 to 15 international or North American, let's say, personnel members existed at the orphanage at any given moment in time. Regarding the orphanage of Loutraki, this is something that we've been doing research to identify information, and Nina can perhaps, and Eleftheria, offer some insight into that as well.
Lefteris were two temporary spots for orphans. They were there only for 6 months, from the end of December 1922 up to April 1923, because the accommodation there was hotels, private hotels. So they were requisitioned for a short period of time, and once there was something more more permanent, like the Syros establishment, children left, and the hotels, returned back to their to the people who owned them.
There is actually a plethora of information that I don't think we've actually tapped into, because from what you saw between 1923 to 1929 is quite a short period of time. So even a short-lived 6 months or 1 year architecturally, and Nina did quite a bit of work on this, and I would like, if she'd like to comment, just on the work of reconstructing, of how difficult it is to reconstruct many of the different kind of elements that existed there, but also both in Syros, but also in terms of the other orphanages that we didn't present today, but we have done in the publication itself.
So regarding the reconstruction or recreation of the site plan of that era, because Lefteris mentioned it just now, I don't know if it was really clear from the presentation that this site plan was made by us. We didn't find any original drawing or blueprint or site plan or aerial picture of the 1930s. So there was no evidence or drawings about the buildings and the general configuration of the whole area of the orphanage. And you saw that it was a really big area. So it was a really big challenge for us to reconstruct the site plan and find the building uses and the land uses and the building program. So to understand the everyday life of the children there. And I think that it was a combination of investigation, archival material, but also investigation on site. So we combined these two. And regarding the archival material, we used several sources. I can refer to some of them. For example, the letters of Kerry Meadley was, I think, the most important one. Kerry Meadley was in charge for the agricultural project, and she was living in a central area of the orphanage. So she was writing letter to her family back to America, and she was describing the everyday life, but she was also describing the buildings and her visits to the personal house or the girls' wing or the boys' wing. So we have a lot of information from her letters. We also used the archive of the New Near East magazine. For example, we found there more information about the construction of the orphanage, but we also used some other sources that were not so relative to the specific orphanage. For example, the archive of the Anatolia College in Thessaloniki. So we found out, thanks to this archive, some details about the architect of the orphanage, who was Lee Mayers. And then we started observing some traces on site, for example, some closed windows, their chimneys, and we combined all this information and we finally came to this result. But it was also difficult to understand the network of the nearest relief institutions and activities in Greece because they were not all of them orphanages. So I will also answer to the previous question. Someone can find information about these specific institutions or hotels or whatever, or spots to the archives and the website of the Nearest Relief, the Nearest Relief Foundation. And he can also type, for example, Loutraki or Corfu, and he might find some pictures of the institution.
Είχατε εδώ μια ερώτηση μπροστά.
Θα σας μιλούσα στα αγγλικά, αλλά είμαι πολύ συγκινημένος, γιατί απόψε είναι σαν να επισκέφτηκα το σπίτι του παππού μου ή το χωριό του παππού μου, οπότε θα μιλήσω στα ελληνικά. Συγχαρητήρια, είναι εξαιρετική δουλειά που κάνατε. Λευτέρη, κύριε Ζόρζο, ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ που επικοινωνήσατε μαζί μου και συμπεριλάβατε και τη φωτογραφία του παππού μου στην παρουσίασή σας. Θα σας πάω ένα-δύο παραγράφους πιο πίσω. Ο παππούς μου ήταν ένα από τα παιδιά που κατόπιν βρήκε κάποιο συγγενή στη Δράμα. Επειδή λοιπόν πέρασα μέχρι τα 20 μου χρόνια περίπου με τον παππού μου, μου έλεγε διάφορες ιστορίες και πάντα μου μιλούσε με καλύτερα λόγια για το ορφανοτροφείο του Σύρου παρά για την εποχή που ζούσε με τους συγγενείς του στη Δράμα. Τα δύσκολα χρόνια ήταν μετά το ορφανοτροφείο. Ναι, λίγο μετά, ναι. Είμαι πολύ συγκινημένος, ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Συγχαρητήρια, εξαιρετική δουλειά σας.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.
Δημήτρη.
Every time I come to one of these lectures or read one of these books, I learn something new. And the numbers are just astounding. So, in 1928, the population of Greece was about 5 million. 1.5 million were refugees. So that gives you, a sense of the scale. And then, 7,000 children going through an orphanage, 23 American women's hospitals. I heard a lecture here where a historian from the parliament was saying that the estimate is that Americans saved about 500,000 lives. So when you think of these numbers, and then you ask yourself the question, why is this forgotten? In its own right becomes, I think, an important question to try and answer. But anyway, I found this also very moving. It's an incredible story. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It's shocking to see how recent memory is. It's only 100 years ago, and people who are relatives, and I'm sure among you here you have relatives who were perhaps at the orphanage or who came over 101 years ago. So yes, I completely agree with you that it's very important to keep this alive, and that's why we had as a central logo something that's one of the mottos of Near East Relief, that they shall not perish, and it continues until today. Thank you.
By the way, sorry, that 30 million that's always mentioned, in today's term, is over $1 billion.
There are two questions online that I need to sort of translate, I guess, because they're in Greek. So Vasiliki Velkou is telling us that she's working in Syros with somebody whose father grew up in the orphanage and became a teacher. And he says that two of the other kids also became teachers. But she says that unfortunately this father, did not want to speak about his life and about the past. And his son didn't know enough, to ask for information. And she says that the name of this person is on the list that you published, Petridis. So I think it's also, very interesting to figure out how you go from numbers, 10, 20,000 to people and to names, because I think this is what we're missing here, that we don't have the actors or the agents necessarily. And I have another question, but
Just a quick comment that regarding this, we have to imagine that the people in the orphanage and the personnel, but also the children, they had been through what is traumatic experience. One of the personal hero of mine, which is Charlie Hanikian, who is the reason why we continued this project. You have to imagine that a couple of 4 or 5 years before he was in Syros, his entire family was killed. 9 children, 8 brothers and 1 sister that was actually pregnant was killed. And then just a few years later, he had to be with all these children, and in all his pictures, he's constantly smiling and playing with the children. And just to give you that sense, so in many cases, we do have examples where they would never speak of it at all, and in other cases, they would have fond memories.
And Giorgos Salakidis is congratulating you for this program and the amazing presentation. And he says that his grandfather and the sister of the grandfather were the only people who who lived from their family. And after 2 years in exile, they came to Greece. And he says that the grandfather was put in the Zapion orphanage, whereas his sister in Syros. So he wants to ask why they separated the two children. Until now, he thought that the Syros orphanage was just for girls, and this is why she was put there. But obviously, this is not the case. So he's wondering.
Obviously, we cannot answer this question, but it seems that there were still children up to 1927 in Athens, in Zapion. This is an ongoing research, especially for the satellite, as I would say, orphanages after 1923. And who knows, material turns up in unexpected places, as Lefteris, as Zorzos.
There is the question continues, and I didn't read it. Are there names? From Zapio. In Syros, there were no names, but you discovered some, right?
So far, I don't have...
In Syros, we discovered them in the archival records of the GAC, the Central Archives. So there were approximately 350 names, and then through very difficult work over the last year, particularly, we were able to identify another 150 names approximately. But no, for Zapion, we don't actually have any lists of names. And this is usually the very first question that people ask us if we know of the names. What we're hoping to create now in collaboration with the Near East Relief Historical Society is a platform where all of this information would be made available to everyone, to researchers, and to be able to access this as well. So that's why it's important to receive more information as well.
It's a call.
Any other questions from the room? Well, thank you very much, not only for the presentation.
If I may, one last very short comment. Just today, the mayor of Hermopolis, Nikos Livadaras, who'd like to thank very much and the municipality of Syros Hermopolis for allowing us to present the exhibition in Syros. They announced that today, we didn't plan it, but today the army passed over the signatures, the final signatures were made essentially, and the municipality, so the largest part of old orphanage or the army base has now passed the municipality, so soon, in a few years, we expect that it will become a university, and we are hoping that there will be an exhibition or museum space there, a permanent museum or exhibition space on the Near East Relief Orphanage of Syros.
Congratulations. I mean, I hope this is good news.
This was all the municipality. This had nothing to do with me, I should say, because that may have sounded like that. This was only the municipality. We only have external support with that.
But I mean, I thank you very much. I really wanted also something that I heard, and I think I heard it right. All the work you've done is also volunteer work, or most of it, right? Which I think it's also something that is to be applauded. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You give me the opportunity just to thank, and I know this is again unorthodox, I would like to thank the main Neros project team, Nina Georgiadou, who's here with me on the stage, Nikos Korakakis, Kostas Zachariou, and there are many, many more. As you can see in the book, there are many, many names that I can't name, but I did want to name them again, and thank you all for being here again tonight.